Hi, I'm Oliver Patrice Vader, and in this video for Spitfire Audio we're going to take a look at a track I've written on my first album. I'll show you how I've used the LCO London Contemporary Orchestra sample library, how their sounds have really inspired the sound on my album, the string sound on my album. I show you real recording versus samples, so we're going to do a bit of comparison, and also I'm going to show you how you can communicate those ideas and those extended techniques to the players via communication and orchestration. So the London Contemporary Orchestra collaborates with amazing artists, features on countless soundtracks and albums, and the good thing is everyone can work with them. You can book them for your projects, your album, your movie score, etc. And they're really an amazing bunch to work with, and they bring so much to the table. And with Spitfire, we were able to catch this kind of artistry and these new articulations. 5 years ago when I was writing my album, and I heard these articulations for the first time, I was like, wow, this is incredible. I've got to create something with this. I want this sound on my album. And so therefore I was kind of mocking up and demoing my whole album with the London Contemporary Orchestra, because these sounds are just so inspiring and fresh and new. Like even just these spectral scrubs here, they're my favorite sound, and you hear them on a lot of Johnny Greenwood soundtracks, etc. And then, for example, here these slackened sounds. This is a very new and fresh sound, or these kind of irregular trems. And I love these twitchy sounds here. And I mean, the good thing is that we've captured these sounds, and this is not something that you might want to exactly recreate and re-record live. I mean, you would probably use the LCO to use their sound because it's such a kind of specific sound. And I'm going to show you actually some soundtracks that I've picked out where they feature on, and you'll see, you really hear their sounds on it. Here this cue The Forgotten Battle. And again, you can hear those scrubby kind of sounds, this like circular motion with the bow. And another example here. And that's where we've heard these slackened sounds here. Let's say short slackened here. If we have a listen here again. So it's exactly that kind of sound, and it's really one of the trademark sounds. Another soundtrack example here from the same video game. So there it's exactly where we have this kind of scrubby sound up here. Just such a wonderful sound, you know. And I'm not saying just use sample because it sounds similar, but you know, with a sound like that, with an extended technique, I believe it's hard to make it sound better or different with the real deal. Anyway, I'm just gonna play this to you here, the real recording. And then here, the sample. So I mean, on the real recording, obviously you get a bleed because you hear the quartet. I was recording them with the quartet, and on the sample you have much clearer sound. But yeah, it comes fairly close to the real deal, that sampled version there. Another example is the score to The Captive State by Rob Simonson. You get that whole kind of trem, sul pons trem, granular kind of trem, as they call it here, the sul pons trem. We have a granular trem, which is a bit more extreme. Something that goes from granular to normale. Here, I think I'm using this in my piece here, granular trem to normale. Let's see how this sounds in the real recording. So a little bit less extreme, but that might have also been me because I mean it was a mock-up, but I knew I was going to be there conducting and communicating to the players, and my orchestrator didn't really say granular trem because the granular trem kind of thing, that's an LCO expression in that sense, like the scrubs, you know. So you've got to know, or they've got to know the expression in order to know what they need to do. Otherwise, you need to communicate with the players, or if you use other players, you need to communicate in a more official way. So for example, with the trems here, slow trem and then faster and then slower again. So that's kind of the irregular trem. So again, in the real recording, I can direct them much better to follow the track. And as well, I was saying sul tasto. They didn't really have a sul tasto trem. I was getting there a little bit influenced by Oliver Arnald's sound as well. So I wanted something between the LCO and Oliver Arnald's sound. So they had trem sul ponte or irregular trem, but I wanted something softer and not as scratchy as the LCO had it there on the sample library. So again, it's always important to communicate a little bit how you want it, not only on paper, but also in the room with the players. I want to play you a couple of other bits of what's really typical LCO. Here, Macbeth. For me, this is such an LCO sound. You hear really these kind of twitchy sounds. So it's not really on the money, the note, right? It's a little bit, or like a wider kind of woozy vibrato. It's almost like a drunken violin, but it's such a beautiful sound, and it's just really, it has really a unique kind of sound and texture that you will hear, you know. Another example here, Thebe. Again, I think you hear this kind of slackened sound there in the basses, softly played, but it's there. Here, short slackened. Longer. Really gnarly kind of sound there. Again, or a kind of granular trem. That you have kind of in there. Of course, you have more normal longs as well, like I've used here in my bass sound down here. We have the basses and jelly doubled there, so you can't have the bass only in this library. It's basses and jelly on your lowest end, because it kind of gives this really oomph. And if we listen to some of the LCO recordings, they have this kind of sound. It's slightly aggressive, raw, honest, and that's what it makes, you know. You Were Never Really Here, another one. For me, that's just typical LCO and Johnny Greenwood's collaboration. So before I show you some more comparisons between real recording versus samples, I'm going to explain you my second part of the inspiration. So at the heart of the track is the piano and these second, third and fourth voices that create kind of a little bit of an intricate kind of melody. So So as you can see, the main piano is quite simple, rolling left hands with a simple melody, but then the second and third voice really open up the track and make it a bit more intricate, a bit more interesting, and it just feels a little bit more fluent. And fluent is what I was after, because The track is inspired by a myth about the Tower of Hercules. It's basically an ancient, almost 2,000-year-old Roman lighthouse in La Coruña, Spain, where I lived during 2017 when I was writing the album. So the myth says that Hercules killed the fearsome Greek giant Geryon after a 3-day battle and buried his head, ordering that a city shall be built on the site. The skull and crossbones representing the buried head of Geryon, as well as the tower, now features on the coat of arms of the city of La Coruña. The location of the tower is on the most northwestern point of Coruña and surrounded by typical Galician landscape. I really loved going out there to look at the rough and wild sea with the waves tearing against the raw cliffs. So Hercules by the Ocean is the music I imagine being played during that gruesome battle surrounded by the wild ocean. So it starts really small here, and hence these scrubbing kind of sounds were really perfect to kind of emulate the ocean, you know? It has really a water kind of quality to it. And so here, my orchestrator would do it in a more traditional way. So he would say circular bowing. And when I was in the session, I would explain them, hey guys, that's the spectral scrubs that I was using of the sample library. Do you remember how you did that? You know, and some players who were at the sample session, of course, remembered and were explaining the other players who may have not been at the sampling session or may have not exactly known what circular bowing meant. But I think the sound in the end came out really well. Again, I was playing you the comparison a little bit, but I just want to play you all the fake strings together here in the beginning. I'm calling them fake strings, but it's this sample library. So here, all the real strings I'm saying. So even just that kind of tremolo, it's just so beautiful when they play it live. And here I'm using the sul tasto, really wonderful articulation. And by the way, I'm leaving everything fairly dry, so I'm not using reverb here or any extra reverb. I'm not sending it to another reverb channel. And here, these real strings here, they're basically just taken. I've recorded everything really close mic and tried to come close to their kind of sound that we have on the library and that I heard on these soundtracks that I just played you to also come close to that. It's no legato on there, but I just don't think that for this kind of writing that it's called for it. These are the real strings, by the way. Switching back to the sample library. It's actually quite nice there, that the rougher kind of sound. Let's see how this sounds in the real strings here. Yeah, so the cello gets a little bit rough there. I can hear it on the right side. I remember the cello sitting right on the right from me. You can hear the player moving a little bit to the bridge. And I just think all this detail when I was conducting that you just, with kind of the communication and eye contact, you can monitor and control this much better. But I still feel that the sample library so far has really been convincing and holding its pride there. So we have really, again, quite scratchy there. And you saw that the orchestrator was writing scratchy. Let's see how this was translated. Really wonderful. Did you hear when the first violin was going into wide slow vip? So that's that kind of twitchy articulation. Really cool. And now the real recording here, first violin. Wow, really beautiful. So as you can see, with just really small comments here and communicating this with the player, you can create such a different kind of vibe, or a different perception of a sound. And yeah, just really, really creatively translated of the player there. Again, let's see how this was translated into the real thing here. So then here we go into the next section. And with this one, the cello pizzicato, I actually had to leave in the sampled sound, because how they've played it here, percussive pizzicato, I believe they played it with their credit cards or their Oyster cards or whatever. So it's a slightly more aggressive pizzicato. And poor Johnny on the cello, it's actually not possible to play it that fast if you want it slightly harsher sounding. So what I've done is I just layered these two parts. And then here as well you have like vivid spiccato. And then you have a staccato that's much more dug in. For the shift of tempo here on this section, I'm changing to the more aggressive pizzicato. Let's see how it sounds in a real string sound. The bass was recorded separately, I have to add here because I feel you can control that big, beautiful instrument much better if it's recorded separately. You have like better volume control, etc. And with the bass, it just sounds really, really lush. And here, again, in the end, I have these slackened sounds. Actually, I wanted them in the viola, but I delivered it to the orchestrator here in the first violin, and then he revoiced the viola to be in the violin. I hope that makes sense. So again, it's quite interesting how the orchestrator actually written it down in a more or less traditional way. And it was me in the session saying, guys, this is your slackened kind of sound that you have in the library. And one of the players, I believe it was the cellist, Johnny, who was there, who was helping me a lot to get this all kind of right and get it, you know, sounding how I wanted it. And he was there in a sampling session. So I think, again, the communication is quite important. Here, by the way, is a bit of footage of how the communication could happen. Well, in your case, like over maybe 2 bars.
Oh, I think we changed that last time,
yes,
didn't we?
Yes.
So I think did I start
maybe
the bar
39.
Yeah, I think I did start the bar before.
2 bars.
Yeah, sure.
It's like a nice long.
Yeah.
Going from trend to I'll play the whole track mixed, mastered, and with reverb, etc. right in the end, so you can compare a little bit there. But before that, I want to show you my third inspiration of this track, and this is a track called Cautiva by Alberto Iglesias, which he then later worked into the soundtrack of La piel que habito, or The Skin I Live in English. And this track is like, well, I have goosebumps whenever I listen to this. And I mean, you will immediately hear that I tried to imitate a little bit this kind of wildness in Alberto Iglesias' track. I mean, if you haven't heard the whole track, please go and check it out. It's really, really a masterpiece. And again, you can really hear that inspiration there if I play this to you here directly. And of course, in this situation, or in this passage here, I'd say the real strings probably beat the sample strings. And here, just for this last bit, I'll show you the mastered version with the piano in. So I really wondered where I could take this track, and when it breaks out, this kind of Alberto Iglesias track here has been a huge inspiration there. And again, I recommend listening to this. So one last thing, how did I get this to the orchestrator? So I didn't deliver it with all the plugins and everything, but I did bounce down each individual line here. So I would make basically this. So now this is obviously the real recording, but I'd bounce for him all my samples in the violin down, or in the first violin, and I'd have it here for him to listen to. So the sampled strings basically. And then I'd take out all the plugins here, but I leave the MIDI in there, and I give him some notes on each articulation. So here, for example, this would just be trem, sol, pont, but again, as I mentioned before, I wanted them much softer, so irregular but softer, you know, trem fast to slow waves. And obviously we would chat over the phone as well, if anything was unclear. And so I would do everything with each of the sections. And so he'd present me with this, and that's kind of double check to see, you know, whether this roughly translates of what I had in mind. Again, knowing that I would be there in the session, and I think especially when working with an ensemble like the LCO, this really, really helps. So you can really workshop and massage your ideas. And again, the players there and you know, Hugh and Rob, they're just really amazing, and they will help making your project sound as good as possible and as creative as possible. Really advertising here the LCO, but I just had such a wonderful experience. And I also recommend to get your hands on the sample library, because it's a great way of entering kind of the orchestral world through these alternative kind of sounds. So I'm going to play you my track one more time. I'm going to play you the mastered version this time, so real strings and mastered, and I'm going to take you through the score as well. As always, thank you very much for listening and watching. And please, if you have any questions or comments, let us know down below and we'll get back to you. Take care. Bye bye.